Continuing on with the family portrait, first thing I did was to make a photograph of the Mike, Karen, Jason, Megan, and Daniel that I wanted to paint. And this is a 8x10. I did an 8x10 because it's convenient to scale up an 8x10 as opposed to some other odd size. Next, I made a layout of what I thought I'd like to make, and that's on a 18x24, and that's just blocking in the arrangement of the people in the portrait and what I might like to have as an arrangement. Next, I laid out a cutout for the portrait to see how it would look on the portrait. After making a cutout for the portrait, next thing I did was to lay a grid, which is 1-inch squares in the grid, and I laid that out over the portrait and the cutout, and marked off the edge of the grid with marks for the grid section along the bottom and along the side for a reference plane. The next part of the project was to cut a piece of masonite, the dimensions that I wanted to make the picture. And masonite, being a fairly thin material, isn't rigid enough to support itself over a large area, so I have framed it in with 1x2 strips to give it rigidity and keep it from flexing when I do the painting, and also to keep it from bending and possibly cracking the paint after the portrait's completed. The next step was to paint the masonite with gesso, which is a water-based compound that's used for sizing canvas, wood, other materials that you want to paint onto. And I've covered the masonite with 2 coats of gesso. Put 1 coat spreading the brush strokes in one direction and let that dry, then come back and put the second coat on with the brush strokes in the opposite or the perpendicular direction to the previous setup. Also, while I was painting the gesso, I painted a couple of test strips so that I could have something to practice on as I'm making the portrait. This is a piece of the masonite that I've painted already to give it some background, to see if that's the background that I wanted to use for the portrait. And that's made up of acrylic paint, burnt umber, and phthalo blue, mixed together about in equal parts. And when you mix those together, depending on what the mixture ratio is, you get a nice black color all the way out to a light blue. And you mix red, which is a basic color of the burnt umber, and blue, of course, you get a little tinge of green. So you can see the little green parts in the background there. Maybe. Looks like the light's reflecting on it so badly that it may not show up very well. Before I painted the gesso onto the board, I made a layout on newsprint, drawing a grid 4 times bigger than the 1-inch squares on my little portrait here. Using the grid that I've laid out, I've sketched in the images of Mike, Dan, Karen, Megan, and Jason. Not sure you can see those very well, but the newsprint sketch that I've laid out I will use to place over the masonite board that I've painted with the gesso. And in between the newsprint and the gesso board, I'm going to place some transfer paper.